Welcome back to Root Feelings, a podcast dedicated to learning and growing from our lived experiences. My name is Carmen, and I want to dedicate this episode to my hometown of Los Angeles. So for this episode, I do want to talk a little bit about what's going on with the wildfires, the history behind that, and tell y'all a little bit of my story as someone that has been impacted by wildfires in the past. This is dedicated to my community, to all the people that are feeling lost, that are feeling nervous or anxious about our future. And I'm hoping that with this episode, y'all will get a grasp at not only the situation, but also how to move forward. And for that, I'll bring in some of my background as an environmental scientist or an environmental activist, and the lessons that I've learned as someone that has survived an environmental crisis like a wildfire. As I mentioned, I grew up in LA, and for decades, we have experienced long periods of droughts. I remember in 2012 when I started at the university, I think we were at like year 4 of a long periods of droughts where we were basically getting no rain. And the danger that poses is that because our state is so big and we have so many different ecosystems, is that in the deserts, in our mountain ranges, our reservoirs don't have the water to sustain the life that lives there. And so what has happened is that all the grass fields, our mountains, our forests, we're drying up, especially if they're not receiving water for months or for years even, just like this happened in the last year with California. They have received little to no water, or little to no rain. And so what that causes is all of our mountain ranges become kindle, and potential fires can break out. If I remember correctly, growing up, as I became more informed, I started to notice that we had like a fire season, which was usually around fall, after, our hot summers, because I do remember we had hot days. So after our hot summers, we would experience a dry fall, essentially. And fall is usually still warm and has potential for, hot days to spark fires. But with climate change, I'm like, is there even a season anymore? It can happen at any time, even during our winter, which is supposed to be, a rain period or a time where it gets cold. But if you live there or if you have family there, you know that this winter has been warm. And truthfully, it's everywhere. We've been noticing. I'm currently in Salt Lake City, and we haven't received as much snow. I hope that it's not a trend, but we do have to acknowledge that the other factor at play is the fossil fuel industry and how the practices of still drilling and mining for fossil fuels is causing our planet to warm. It's a little bit of like understanding of how the planet works and all of that, but in a short sense is that we're pumping all of these chemicals or molecules into the atmosphere that are causing it to warm. We had the term global warming, but we had to reframe that because it doesn't always look like warming. You know, sometimes it looks like extreme weather, winter storms, like the one that's happening also in the southeast region of the US right now. So the fossil fuel industry has been knowingly polluting our planet, and as a result we're seeing these changes in our climate, which is why we use the term now climate change. I think it's a crisis, but sometimes that word can cause a lot of panic and fear in us. But yeah, I think we need to understand that and be able to put two things together. Is how is this starting, which is understanding the fossil fuel industry and our role in our consumption of those fossil fuels, as well as understanding our climate and understanding the way that droughts and fires are mitigated. And that's where I think it's also important to acknowledge the indigenous practices and the indigenous knowledge that we, and I say we because I was brought up in a white imperialist society that has killed, displaced, and committed genocides to indigenous communities across our nation and across the world. And what that has done is we've lost a lot of knowledge in how these communities have taken care of our planet. And the cultural practices that us as Americans have is the Smokey the Bear, and like only you can stop a wildfire. And I like to share with people that that was a campaign against the wildfire practices that the indigenous communities had, which was to what we now call controlled fires, is to have controlled fires where they would burn land, because they understood that fire is part of our natural practice, our natural process in our planet, is that fires spark out of nowhere. And so, you know, we lost that practice, and we lost the practice of controlled fires, which has resulted in now whole mountain ranges that are now kindled. And so there is a call to like educate ourselves and to be more connected and respect the indigenous communities and their knowledge. And so I think we do have a responsibility to be informed community members and not assume that we know more than others. It's more about trying to understand what those practices were intended for and how do we go about it in a way that doesn't disrupt too much. And so learning about that, I think, really opened my eyes to our own lack of knowledge, to the way our education has misinformed us and has censored the knowledge of those communities. Now moving forward, I think it's important that we reconnect with that knowledge, that we reconnect with those practices instead of assuming that we can control everything, because these wildfires are natural things. They can happen with, I mean, if you understand physics, if you understand how to start a fire, you know, we've seen the magnifying glass that can, you know, with enough sunlight can cause a little fire. So it's something as simple as that, or an ember traveling hundreds of feet and starting a fire in a completely different region. Like, it's that knowledge that I think we all need to understand a little bit more, and not rely on people that have power to have our best interest in mind. With that, I want to talk a little bit about my personal experience with wildfires. I mentioned that I went to university. I moved up from LA to Santa Cruz, which is a beautiful forested community. And in 2020, actually the day or 2 days after my birthday, in the middle of the night, it was like 3 a.m, the windows opened, because I had some beautiful windows that opened out, that looked out into the forest, that I hosted deer regularly. They would come and munch on my grass and eat my apples and all of that. But in that night, we woke up to a big wind storm that opened our windows, and that startled us. I remember getting up, looking out the window, and lightning was striking. And it was insane. I never imagined something like that happened. You know, when we hear about lightning strikes, you think 1 or 2. We think it doesn't strike twice in one area or in the same place. But unfortunately that night, I don't know the exact amount, but upwards of 200 lightning strikes hit our forest and caused hundreds of wildfires. And I was up in the mountains, and within the matter of 2 to 3 days, we also got an evacuation order. The fire was about a mile out from where I lived, but between that mile was all forest. So basically potential kindle. I remember waking up and seeing the images that y'all are seeing now in LA of an orange sky with our car with ashes, and a sense of, what do I do now? Do I do something to protect my property? If I can do anything, do I flee? Do I go somewhere? Like, what do you do? So I really sympathize with what people are experiencing right now, in that sense of not knowing what to do, not knowing if it's better to just stay or if it's better to leave. And after contemplating with my partner for a few hours, I was like, should we go? Should we not? Where do we go? I remember that our car had broken down. How do we go? How do we get anywhere? There's a lot of those questions that came up that I was like, wow. I was fortunate enough to have a community that was able to help me. Shout out to Francisco and Oscar, who helped me during that time, who took us in. He lived just down the mountain from where I was, and he took us in for a few days while we tried to figure out, what do we do? Where do we go? Unfortunately, I lived in Santa Cruz, a lot of my friends and family, because all of my family is in LA, but you know, I just didn't want to intrude too much with my friends. And so, and actually, I think it's important to acknowledge it was 2020, so there was still that sense of, it was the summer of 2020, and there was that sense of health concerns, making sure that we don't get people sick. And so I remember like just trying to figure out if I go down to LA to stay with my mom for a few days, or with my partner to figure out if it made sense to go see his family. He had family up more north, but we ended up coming to Utah. I know it was way far, but his dad was like, come here, there's a place for y'all to stay, you know, we'll help y'all get out here, whatever it takes. And for me, that just kind of opened my eyes a little bit. One, recognizing that, like, yeah, I had friends in Santa Cruz, but what I needed was my family. I needed to feel comfortable, to feel comfortable, to feel connected, to feel supported more widely. And, you know, I only had a handful of friends that were there. And so after that, I had so much anxiety coming back. As I mentioned, we were up in the mountains, and my next thought was mudslides. And my house, we had a stream right behind our house, so I was like, when the rains do come, my concern is that all that debris, all the bushes, the trees that don't have roots anymore are gonna come down. That did happen in some of the areas, but as far as I know, the house still stands. It still has, I went to go visit it a few years ago now, I think back in 2023, and it's flourishing, you know, it's thriving the way that nature always does. But for me, it was a lesson going back to the community and to finding people that can uplift you during times of crisis. So I wanted to share that, not just to relate or, you know, to tell the story, but because seeing those images, having family in LA, growing up in California, understanding and having studied the climate crisis, I'm like, this story unfortunately isn't unique. It's something that my fellow Los Angeles is experiencing, and I just want to wish that, I just hope that, as I said in my post or in one of my stories this week, that these fires don't burn down our dreams, that instead they fertilize our hopes for the future. They fertilize the community networks that we're building, and that they empower us to learn more, to be connected to our community, to be connected to the indigenous people, to learn more, and to do our part. The climate crisis doesn't care where you live, how much money you have, what background you are, where you were born. It does not have mercy for any of those things. But what does thrive is our communities. So I wanted to also share this book that I actually picked up today. I was like, I wanted to go check out a different book, but I started looking around and I found this amazing book, which I'm like dashing through. But it's called A Field Guide to the Apocalypse, a mostly serious guide to surviving our wild times. And one, it reminded me, I want to shout out another podcast that motivated me during that time, which was the How to Survive the End of the World. That's by Adrienne Marie Brown and her sister, which I'm forgetting her name, but she's also an amazing person, creator, artist, activist. But they have this podcast called How to Survive the End of the World, which is inspired by Octavia Butler and the parable of the sower. So these are all things that I hope, if you're interested in learning more, that you either listen or read to understand a little bit more of how do we move forward, like how do we move in a way that doesn't take over, that our brains and our minds are not in a constant state of fear and anxiety, because what's at hand. I remember with my students, they would talk to me a lot about eco-anxiety. And what that means is that as people that study the environmental science or environmental studies, if you're someone that notices, you notice that shit's going down with our climate, that these changes are having drastic impacts on our planet, and that knowledge can be overwhelming and can cause a lot of anxiety, because these are issues that feel like we can't control. Like, you can't stop a wildfire from starting because it's gonna happen. You can try to prevent it from spreading, but that's as far as we can get. Once the fire starts, it starts. So there's that eco-anxiety term that I remember navigating with students, and going back to this book, I was like, wow, like this is something that I wish I would have shared with them, and probably will share with the organization. But the first chapter was like, whoa, like, thank you for that reminder. Thank you for the reminder that it's okay to be scared, but to also know, again, a little bit of that history, to also know that we have survived so many disasters and quote unquote apocalypse, because that's what it feels like. We've survived, thousands of years as a species, navigating different types of disasters. So the fact that we're here today, I think what this first chapter was getting at is that the fact that we're here today is a result of all of those survivors of those disasters. So a reminder to myself and to all of us that we were built for this, that we were built to survive and adapt and navigate different disasters. The other points that, some of the points that it was raising was that part of our survival was a result of our knowledge. Understanding the environment, understanding how different weather patterns come about, understanding that the nature is really important. And then there's a part of, and then understanding that there's also a connection to, we've survived as a community, as a species, not individuals. That the protection, that the survival of those that have made it this far is because of our community, is because of the parents who took care of us, and the parents and the siblings and the friends of our parents, and then us building, as adults, building networks and communities that are there to help us out. Like my friend Francisco, who took us in and helped us move. Like his family that took us in and let us stay with them. Like the family that, you need help paying a bill and you call, or, they call you, type of thing. It's that community network that we built, and that's fundamental to our survival. And I hope that, we continue to emphasize that, and that we prioritize building our networks and staying connected to our communities. So I might dedicate a whole episode to building communities and how to show up as a community member, as a friend, as a family member, sister. But that being one of the fundamental things, and I definitely needed that reminder, because it is thanks to all of the people that I've mentioned and the people that I haven't, that have shown up to me, that I've been able to be here. So thank you to all of them. The other part that I was starting, because again, I just got this book today, but the second chapter is about our brain, and it poses the question, like, what is the single most important tool that you need on your go bag? And I know that there's a lot of tangible things that we need to bring with us, but the one thing that she mentions is our brain. And again, reading that, I was like, oh my God, yes. If I would have stayed in that, if back when I was experiencing that wildfire, or living through that wildfire, if I would have stayed frozen, if I would have been overwhelmed with fear, I don't know what would have happened. Probably would have stayed there, or stayed long enough where then it became dangerous for me to leave. And my brain had to process everything, pack up, leave the house in a safe enough condition, communicate with the people around me, ask for help. And, and if I hadn't processed all of that, I probably would have been in severe danger. So it talks about how to navigate situations, and reminding ourselves that, yeah, we're built for this, and that we have to listen to what our body is saying. If it's saying, you need to get out of there, get out of there. Don't wait until the last moment. Those were the two things that came up. The book seems amazing so far. The author, by the way, is Athena Aktipis. I hope I'm saying that. Tippis. And I can't wait to learn more from it. One other part that I want to get to, but that it's starting to emphasize early on in this book, is the idea of having fun. And the idea, I was looking ahead a little bit, and it talked about storytelling. It talked about the importance of having some humor, making jokes, telling stories, to pass on knowledge, but also to stay grounded and stay connected to one another. And I think that that's important. I know that when you're in it is really hard. Truthfully, it took me a really long time to process the fires that I experienced in 2020. I think that if I would have had a book like that in 2020, I would have leaned in more into creating, into talking and sharing these stories early on, and not have been caught up in the grief that I felt, because it was so much grief. Like, even the way that I described the house earlier, there's a lot of like fondness, there's a lot of beautiful memories I have of that house and that community, and having to let that go, I grieved a lot, because I imagined myself for as long as I could, but I'm also grateful for the way that the universe works, and the way that sometimes it pushes us and it forces us to get out of our comfort and to start noticing more, to start building those networks that I was talking about, and to start listening to yourself. As in, if you have, again, I mentioned the dream, if you have a dream, if you have a vision for the future, that you start acting on it instead of hoping that things will work out in the role, the position that you have at the moment. I think this is a call to myself, to others, to be more proactive, to not wait, to give yourself time to grieve, but not stay in that state of hopelessness and loss and anxiety that doesn't help us. So I hope that this motivates you to learn more, to read more, to have fun, to find joy in these moments, and try to see some sort of purpose in all of this. I know it's hard when you're in it, but once you start listening to yourself and listening to what you want, the vision for a better future, I think we'll be more proactive in actually making it happen, instead of, just accepting things as they are, or just feeling like you can't do anything about it. So I hope that this, again, I would love for these episodes to resonate with y'all, to inspire you and motivate you to take action, to not just be a bystander, but to show up when it's needed. And thank you to my community that has literally saved me, that has cared for me, that has tended to my grief, and that has given me grace to learn and grow. With that being said, I want to encourage everyone to reach out to your circle, to make time to share stories, to share your grief, to share your joy in the midst of this apocalypse. I also want to shout out all the people that are out there fighting, the firefighters, the reporters, the mutual aids, the people that are sharing also resources. If you don't have much, but you have a voice, and if you could share that, it'll reach more and more, and hopefully, we can get all those people that lost their homes or, were impacted in any sort of way, that they have some peace of mind in knowing that their community is going to show up. So thank you to everyone who is out there doing that work, and thank you to everyone that's listening, for giving me some of your time to listening to what I have to offer. And I hope, as always, that this resonates. As one of my mentors, colleagues, in my previous role, Don Williams, he would say, if it comes from the heart, then it lands in the heart. So I hope that it lands in the heart, and that you stay safe, that you stay informed, and that you do your part in showing up. So thank you for listening to Root Feelings. Stay safe, take care, and see you later. Bye.